In this chapter, we're going to take a look at 5 of our special senses. We're going to start by looking at olfaction or smell, then we'll move on to gustation or taste, and then vision, and then we'll take a look at this vestibulocochlear apparatus, which is going to tell us about equilibrium and balance in the vestibule and hearing in the cochlea. So if we start with olfaction, it's our sense of smell. Our sense of smell is very discriminative. We can tell over 10,000 different types of smells, and we have 380 types of receptors to do that. You're going to find this is really different than taste, which we only have 5 types of receptors. So overall, we have all these different types of receptors. We have over 10 million total receptors. They're in that little teeny area in that epithelial membrane at the base of our cribriform plate there. So let's take a look at this a little bit. Here's our cribriform plate. This you might be familiar with as being the olfactory bulb, and you can see that olfactory bulb right here. Here's our frontal lobe of our brain, cribriform plate, and then we have our cranial nerves sticking down here. So that's what we're looking at here. These are our cranial nerves coming through these little holes in the cribriform plate. And now we're going to see how we really detect smell. So there's 3 types of cells in this epithelium, that's this olfactory epithelium, right inferior to that cribriform plate. So we'll start with our receptor cells. And these receptor cells, what we're going to call our first order neurons, these are the ones that are going to interact with our odorants. So odorants are chemicals, the things that we're going to smell in the air. And what's going to happen is those odorants get caught in this mucus layer of the epithelium, epithelial layer, and then there's going to be little receptors on these receptor cells that are going to pull in those odorants. So these receptor cells have non-motile cilia. So they're actually cilia, but they're not moving. They're just like little arms or branches hanging out there with receptors on them to catch these chemicals. They're axons. So if we look at these colored cells here, we've got this purplish blue one, and we've got a different one that's green here. The axons of these cells are going to be what comes up. This is what cranial nerve 1 is. So this whole cell really is making up. Cranial nerve 1 is a bunch of neurons, right? So remember, a nerve is a bunch of axons all together. So we call this cranial nerve 1. All of these 380 types or 10 million different receptors in our system here. So that's first order. Down here in this epithelium, we've also got supporting cells. And supporting cells are going to be columnar epithelial. So we see some of these guys right here. And they're basically going to be providing support and nourishment and different types of proteins and help to clean out and keep this area regulated. So these are the supporting cells. Notice they do not have axons that are coming up here. And then we've got what are called basal cells. And the basal cells are going to be way up here. And you can see these guys. These are going to be stem cells that are basically producing new receptor cells. These guys only last about a month or so, so we're constantly turning these over. In the olfactory glands, we said that we have olfactory glands, and they produce mucus. And they're in that epithelial layer as well. They're right next to all those receptor and supporting and basal cells. So you can kind of see, this is a electron micrograph or microscopic picture of what we were just looking at. So you can see the little basal cells up on top. You may see some olfactory receptor cells and supporting cells. And then this kind of lighter pink region here, we're going to have this gland called the olfactory gland. And its duct is going to be coming down through here. And that's what's going to be providing all of our mucus. And that mucus is going to help to keep this membrane moist. And this is what's going to dissolve or absorb all the odorants that we're smelling and breathing in. And then here you can see this is our actual receptor cell. And you can see these cilia coming off of that. So those cilia, remember, are microtubules. And on these cilia are going to be these little receptors. And that's what's going to absorb all of our odorants. So the pathway for this whole thing, if you can imagine this now, you can see our little gland here with our duct going out. We can see our receptor cells, our basal cells and supporting cells. So what's going to happen is this nerve is going to get excited when it gets a chemical that fits its receptor, and its axons are going to travel up. They travel up in little groups through these uh, epithelial foramina, and in about 40 axons per group are going to go up there, and they're going to travel through that cribriform plate, and they're going to synapse in this area called the glomeruli of the olfactory bulb. So remember, we got that big old olfactory bulb sitting at the base of that cribriform plate, and what they're going to synapse onto are called mitral cells. And these mitral cells are going to get excited, and their axons are going to continue back as the optic or the olfactory tract. So all this is olfactory. All this is olfactory information. The olfactory tracts are primarily going to go to the primary olfactory area, which is going to be on the temporal lobe, the very tip of that, the frontal part of that temporal lobe. They're also going to send extensions to the thalamus, because the thalamus eventually gets all of our sensory information. And they'll have some going to the prefrontal cortex. And that prefrontal cortex is going to help with discrimination and identification of the odor. That's what all of these are going to be doing. But you'll notice that it's all above that reticular formation. So none of this is going to help wake you up when you're asleep at night. And that's why we said before that if you're in a fire, people often die in a fire because they don't sense their smell because they aren't awake or alert for it, because this is all happening above that reticular formation. That wraps up this section of smell. Oh, I forgot about the limbic system. Also goes to the limbic system because smell is very associated with your emotions. And if you remember, the emotions are regulated in the limbic system. So that's why the smell of those chocolate chip cookies or a Thanksgiving dinner or your favorite dessert can really bring up a lot of emotions with you with your memory.